Welcome everybody into the another edition of the Warm Weather Fans Sunbelt podcast, the final podcast eclipsing the 2024-2025 football season. We are talking about the final three bowl games that we did not get that happened after Christmas because Matt and I were on this podcast before Christmas. Due to the weird spacing of the bowl schedule, we wanted to go ahead and get these final three games in, and then we'll break into off-season content. But I'm here with Zeke Palermo. Zeke, how's it going? How was your holidays? Anything you wanna tell the folks? Anything like that?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Holidays were good. Always a good time, especially with I guess since the last time y'all recorded and since I was on, we've seen the new college football playoffs play out in a way that I don't know. I don't want to call it necessarily unexpected, but as we've talked about here on this podcast before, not doesn't feel like the right way to go about things. You talked about off-season content. Before we get started, I do want to implore everyone watching, whether that's live on X, later on the YouTube, or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, to let us know what you want in the off-season. We have a few things cooking. We're absolutely going to be over the draft content. Mike Green probably being the biggest name there out of the Sun Belt that will be going into the draft. He's probably a day two edge rusher, could make a big impact in the NFL. We've got some more trivia stuff that will probably be YouTube exclusive for some time, but we want to know what you guys want to hear, and we want to engage with our audience as best we can. So let us know, whether it be in the comments of our YouTube videos, add us on Twitter at Warm Weather Fans. You can email us. I don't think we've had an email for a year and a half now, and we've received one email there, warmweatherfans@gmail.com. So please hit us up and let us know what you want, what you don't want. So we can, it's a long off season, especially for these G5 schools where recruiting news is barren. Spring football news is barren. Unless you're there at the game, you're not going to get, a real good grasp of what's happening. And unfortunately, between the three of us, I imagine Matt is the only one that's going to be going to his team's spring day, and that's because he works as a job with that team. So let us know how we can fill the dead space between now and June when we start this 2025 season previews.
I mean, I would watch our spring game if Georgia Southern as a school didn't keep it under wraps like the FBI trying to cover up like Area 51. Like last year they announced like, hey, for the first time ever, we're putting the spring game on ESPN Plus. And I was like, sweet, I can watch it. I don't have to physically attend. And then they were like, well, actually, there's a conflict with a softball game at the same time, so it just won't be available anywhere. And I was like, okay, that makes no sense, but whatever, fine. So, yeah, if they would just operate like these larger schools, like the SEC, for instance, and just put their spring games broadcasted on like ESPN Plus, even if it was like in the on-demand section, that's better than nothing. So, I don't know if they're ever going to pull their heads out of their rear ends on that one, but yeah, Matt will have something from the Louisiana spring game because again, like you said, I doubt you're driving over to Turner Field to watch that one. I am not making the 12-hour pilgrimage to Statesboro. I'm just not gonna do it. I got better things to do with my time. No offense. All right. So as I said at the top, we're here to recap the last three bowl games that we did not get to in our last episode because we shot that one before Christmas Day. So starting off with December 26th, the day after Christmas, Arkansas State played a shootout game with Bowling Green, 38-31. Harold Fannin Jr. for Bowling Green. Usually I don't single out the non Sunbelt school first, but to have 17 catches, 213 yards, and a score, you were talking about Mike Green at the top being a day 2 pick. Harold Fannin Jr. is very quickly playing himself into a day 2 selection. You've obviously got those 2 tight ends at the top from Penn State and Michigan. But who's tight end 3? I don't see a reason why it shouldn't be Fannin. And like, I know we're not going super heavy on the Sunbelt stuff right off the bat, but like he's so impressive to me. Like before this game, he had 1,300 yards this season on 100 catches. So he's just going ballistic. And Jalen Rayner played fairly well, 221 yards, 2 scores, 1 interception. And Wallace, the running back, as well as Corey Rucker. So basically, this is kind of what you can say it positively or negatively. This is kind of what I had come to expect from Arkansas State, which is a ton of points, not a lot of defense. Defense is optional some days. Some days you're playing an 18-16 rock fight with South Alabama, but some days you're in a shootout to the very end. And it was one of those things where it was almost like a fake comeback by Bowling Green. Like, Arkansas State went up 14 at the end of the game. Bowling Green scores with a minute 42 to go. It didn't get the onside. So it was really neck and neck, because it was like Arkansas State would pull out to a lead. They went up 17-7 after the first quarter. Bowling Green fought back, and it was just kind of a tug of war, but it felt like, although it took them basically 4 quarters to kind of cement that Arkansas State always kind of had control of the game, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree with you on Harold Fannin. That guy shot up over the past several weeks, or the last several weeks of the season, not necessarily of real time. I'll point out, it's easy to rack up yards and receptions when you're throwing the ball 50 times. But he is a very high volume tight end, and those guys have translated very well to the NFL. We saw the Iowa tight ends. It was Hawkinson and who was the
Kittle.
other Kittle? No, he came from Iowa State. It was Fant.
No, they all came from Iowa.
It was Was there another tight end in Hawkinson's draft class?
I don't have that encyclopedic knowledge of every draft.
Iowa has churned out high volume tight ends that have translated very well. Brock Bowers was Georgia's top receiver for several years and just set several rookie receiving records. So tight ends with high volume translate. And so Bowling Green is certainly a step down from Georgia and even Iowa in terms of stature, in terms of just like baseline. Well, he's from Georgia, so I know he has to be at least X good. So that's the Harold Fannin talk. We have to talk about Butch Jones, because
how are you going to slander him after a win? I'm interested.
It's not slander; it's just wonder, because year 4, he gets his first bowl win at Arkansas State. What is his ceiling? I'm good. I've bet. I feel like I'm just picking up the conversation we've had every week for the past 2 years. I'm going to bang the drum of, what is your ceiling with Butch Jones? Because 4 years in, your ceiling is 8 wins. And that is not to say that Butch Jones has been an utter failure. I do believe that he is a very poor head coach and should not be at this job for very long. But is 8 wins what Arkansas State is capable of? Is that what Jalen Rayner is capable of? Corey Rucker, Zach Wallace, like, these are very talented skill players that Arkansas State has had. How much longer does Butch Jones get? Because I say this every week. I'm getting exhausted.
Extension, right?
I understand, but why? What shined in winning one more regular season game than you did last year? What makes you worthy of that extension?
Well, I think
it's exhaustion is what I feel.
I think what it is he have you heard that like saying or phrase like if you keep expectations low, like it's better for
Mhm.
you in the long run than to come out hot and then you underperform.
Right.
I think that's kind of what happened with him, which was his first couple years at Arkansas State were just so bad that when he won, what did they win? Like you said, 7 games last
They
year?
won they won 6 games last year.
Okay, so he probably doubled his win total from the year from prior to that. So
2,
they're
3, 6, 7.
right. So if you're Butch Jones's agent, you can sell that as, "Hey, we're on the uptick here." Like it and it whether it's right or not, I don't know if it is because I'm not that tapped into Arkansas State as a program. If anybody is, feel free to tweet at us at Warm Weather Fans on X. It depends. What kind of situation did Blake Anderson leave them in roster wise? Because it wasn't great in Blake Anderson's final season, but it also wasn't a 2-win team. So like I'm kind of caught in the middle here, both between you and Matt and kind of in making my decision on Butch Jones. I'll go ahead and tell you though, this is where I differ from Matt and I lean more towards your side. If they don't ever field a competent defense, this is his ceiling. Is like 8
Mhm.
wins, 7 regular season wins and an 8th in the bowl game. Because we've seen time and time again throughout the years, they have such a problem putting together a full, complete game. You know, they like I understand what Michigan's deficiencies are, but that Michigan game they played earlier this season is probably the closest thing to a complete game that I've seen Arkansas State play in a couple of years. So it's like one game the offense is going crazy, the defense is nowhere to be found. Another game, South Alabama immediately keeps popping into my head because I'm like, that was just so far off the reservation from what we had kind of come to expect. You're you can't muster 21 points. Now they won that game, but you
Mhm.
can't muster 21 points against frankly a South Alabama team that hadn't done all that well defensively this season. So that's what I mean. I'm kind of caught in between on him because I'm going to keep saying this and I'll say this in June or July whenever we start our previews for 25. If they can't field a competent defense, this is his ceiling. Because how many great Sunbelt teams have we seen that just fielded like a meh, like bottom third of the country defense, and like we're like, wow, they're amazing. So
Mhm.
I I think that's kind of where I sit on it is if he starts cobbling together some pieces on defense, then we can talk. But until that happens, like I don't know how you can look at him and go, we're going to be just as good as Louisiana or Texas State or pick any of these teams. Like I, I understand Marshall's rebooting, but like you're probably not even really as good as them at this point. Like there's this weird middle ground territory where they're always like third to fifth in the standings, kind of in for the
Mhm.
West, and and it doesn't seem like they kind of had the recipe to take the next step up. So that's a lot of where my concern stems from. That and Jalen Rayner just kind of being stagnant in his progression as a quarterback this year.
I think I'll say to Butch Jones's benefit, Jalen Rayner stagnating it is going to probably keep him in Jonesboro, right? At least makes him far less sexy transfer target than he was as a freshman. Um, I mean, Zach Wallace still is only a sophomore as well. Rucker is on the older end, but I believe he has eligibility remaining. I'm not certain on that. Um, but I mean, this was statistically speaking the worst defense in the conference. Worst, most touchdowns allowed, second worst rush defense, second worst pass defense. Um, and yet you, despite like this idea or this narrative that it's a all offense, no defense team, there were so many games where I still felt like there was meat on the bone offensively to be gotten. Like they only scored 27 against Georgia State. That's a very poor defensive Georgia State team. Same thing with Troy, only 34 points, and you allowed 31. Like Troy was pretty bad all year. Granted, you go into Southern Miss, everyone was putting up 40 points against Southern Miss. I think the gap between the offense and defense isn't even close enough to where it needs to be to offset how poor the defense is. Like, obviously, the defense needs to improve, right? But there is a threshold that your offense needs to be this good. You need to be this tall to ride in order for you to have a bottom tier defense. Arkansas State does not come in with that type of offense. It's not like we're looking at the Coastal of several years ago. This is just a really good quarterback with some pretty good weapons who's really good. And that's ultimately what it comes down to.
I think if you go back and look at their schedule, the teams they beat within the conference, great. South Alabama, Southern Miss, Troy, Georgia State, UL Monroe. By and large, those were middling to kind of bottom feeder teams in the conference. Mm-hmm. I think kind of to support what I said a little earlier about the being in the upper echelon kind of the West Division, I think the thing that stands out to me the most was getting outscored a combined, 96-28 in games against Louisiana and Texas State. That to me shows, I don't know if it's a game planning thing. I don't know if it's a roster issue. That to me shows like they're still not ready to kind of take that next step and be like a real contender. So probably more than any other team, just because Butch Jones has been there for so long. I mean, he's the longest tenured coach in the conference at this point at the same school. Like, until they are the most I'll believe it when I see it team to me, because he's had multiple years to kind of put this together, and they have yet to kind of field a great, even passable to good defense at this point. And I understood what you said about the offense, but to me, their issue has been less about offensive like consistency and just defensively, like, are they ever going to put it together? Because you can't take them seriously if they're getting beat 41-9 against Texas State or 55-19 against Louisiana. Do you want to be in the conference championship game? Because those types of performances, like 4 weeks apart, are not going to get it done. So I mean, it's up to Butch Jones. It seems like to me, and I'm kind of joking about this, kind of not. It seems to me when he goes to the portal or goes to high school recruiting, he's only looking on the offensive side of the ball, and he's like, have you seen the meme of like the lady holding the baby above the water and there's like the skeleton down at the bottom? The skeleton in this case is the defense. Like, he's holding the baby, which is the offense, and he's like, oh, sweet baby. And then the defense is just drowning out there. So again, until I can name a defensive player on their team off the top of my head, which I can't, and that's not like being casual. That's truly just like none of these guys really make an impact, honestly. Until that happens, like, I'm gonna kind of keep the same. They're gonna be middling. They're gonna win 6 to 8 games every year, but they're not gonna get any higher than that. They're not really gonna compete for the West because Louisiana's always there. We kind of anticipate UL Monroe to keep building. Southern Miss was on life support, and Charles Huff and Braylon Braxton, who knows what that looks like in Hattiesburg. Troy maybe is figured some things out at the end of the season, especially with their quarterback spot. South Alabama was 1 win behind them and again lost by 2 points. I think they're very comparable. So it's a very competitive West Division, and if you're just fielding a Pop Warner level defense, like, what can you get out of that, honestly, at the end of the day?
Not much.
Yeah. I'm honestly, when you said Corey Rucker, you thought he had another year of eligibility. I was shocked. I was like, he's got to be done, dude. He went to Arkansas State, transferred out, and transferred then back in, and I'm like, there's no way he's got time left.
Dude,
But
the COVID years really like that. We're in the last group of guys that have an extra COVID year where they get 6 years instead of 5 by default. Let me see if I can't find that.
well, even the JUCO ruling that just came out, like, I don't think he went to junior college, but like, there's a reason like Joey Aguilar has like 2 years, who just transferred to UCLA, has like 2 years of eligibility remaining because he was like, yeah, I was in JUCO for 2 years, and the NCAA is like, those don't count. You can play till you're 27, and he's like, sweet. So
Rucker is coming back.
okay. I mean, I'm not knocking it. I'm if you
Right.
can take advantage of
Just
the rule, but we're gonna have guys that are in college for 8 years, like that tight end at Miami. So, do we have you have anything else on this game before we move on?
Not about the game. It was relatively disinteresting. As you expressed before the first set of bowl games, it's just like I don't care about playing these MAC schools, dude. No conference
Yeah,
disinterests me more than the MAC.
because on a yearly basis, like they are lucky to field like 4 bowl eligible teams.
But it's
Like,
interesting because like the same could be said about Conference USA, right? But maybe because it's proximity to like where I am at, like geographically, I have more interest in it. But for whatever reason, the MAC is just you play on Wednesdays. That's cool.
I think my biggest issue is just like none of those teams to me have like any history. Like you go through and look at the teams, it's like Bowling Green, Ohio, Buffalo, Akron, all of these, Miami of Ohio. You're just like, cool, man. Like Northern Illinois, you guys one time played Florida State in a bowl game and got crushed after basically being like, no, we definitely deserve to be here. So it's just like, it's tough because it's like the only history you guys really have is like being a joke is the history. So
You know what'll draw me to the MAC? Bring an NDSU up.
NDSU is like doesn't want to do it. Have you heard
Oh
all
yeah,
of
I
that?
mean, yeah. I mean, I
Like,
wouldn't
been
either.
full
When you're
on.
running the table like they are.
I've always I know that like why I know there's like legitimate reasons. I always joke around and like am like they're just scared. Like they're just afraid to compete like at the highest level at this point. And like
That's
until
all
they
right,
move
man.
up, I'm gonna be like, yeah, you're just scared. Like it's fine. You can you can be afraid. Like everybody's afraid sometimes. You guys are just afraid every year. Like whatever. All right. So Arkansas State is now 8-5 with that win. Bowling Green drops to 7-6. It stinks that Matt couldn't join us today because I watched the TCU Louisiana game for about a quarter. And if you look at the win probability chart for TCU, I'm looking at it right now on ESPN. I don't think it goes any lower than 74% winning toward TCU. Like, I understand that Ben Wooldridge was coming back from his shoulder collarbone injury. This was a tough one to go out on as your last college start. 7 of 20, 61 yards and a pick, and got pulled, I think, in the third quarter or maybe even earlier than that. It's bad when we watched the Sun Belt title game. It's bad when they're like, maybe we should put Beal in. And it's like the guy that put up 3 points against Marshall. Sure, let's get him in the game some. So yeah, they just got railroaded by TCU. And I mean, this game was never close. TCU walked down the field on the first possession, and that really set the tone for the game. I know Matt tries to like be very thoughtful when it comes to his Louisiana takes. I don't have any relationship to Louisiana. Their defense, it it's
And cra-
rough.
no, it especially here in these past two games that we saw against TCU and Marshall, but even predating that, ULM, Troy, South Al, like these are games against
Appalachian
teams
State.
that they should be, with the exception of TCU and Marshall, I'll grant, but like ULM, Troy, South Al should have been a cakewalk where between the three games you allow maybe 49 points across three games, something like that. And instead they allowed 23 to ULM, 30 to Troy, and 22 to South Al. This team, Louisiana, really started to fold in the second half, even though like the wins kept coming. Which again, Matt's gonna have better insight on this, and I'm sure we can talk about it next time he's on. But it's just like this team kept winning games, so you cannot take that away from them. But as the season progressed, once we hit the back half of the season, kind of after their bye, following a win against Coastal, it just felt like a very different team. It didn't feel like the Louisiana that was far and away the best team in the West, and probably for in the early half of the year was probably the best team in the conference.
Well, you do have to think that Wooldridge did break his collarbone. So there are starts in there that belong to
Chandler Fields,
Chandler
right?
Fields. So
But the
to
offense is
say
not the concern I have there.
right,
It's
the
really the
defense has been a
defense.
concern all year.
I but I don't know if it was a concern. I cannot remember what our thoughts were at the time of these games. But as I look at the scores of the games in the early year, they're allowing 13, 24, 10, 10, albeit against weaker opponents. But then you come up against a team like Troy, who is, about as bad as, or, same par, if not worse than App was, and you allow 30 points there. You allow a very poor at this point ULM team 23. The Fields thing, we've said this before. Chandler
I
Fields for several
I
years has been
remember
the best
saying,
backup in the conference.
yeah. I mean, I remember saying as early as the Appalachian State game that they frankly just don't seem very willing to tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were times I watched that game very closely because that was sort of the premier game of that week, and I was like, Matt, I mean, I remember like the episode after being like, hey Matt, I don't know if this is like a thing with you guys like on a regular basis, but I you guys don't seem very willing to like meet the running back in the hole. Like there's a lot of like we meet and then I'm just sort of chopping my feet waiting for him to make a move instead of like accelerating and trying to make a tackle. And their tackling to me has been an issue all year. I think they were good enough offensively to get away with it. Um, the Coastal Carolina game comes to mind. If Wooldridge doesn't make that insane throw down the field to Carter, the tight end, they either don't win that game or it's like a 3-point win.
Mm-hmm.
Because that really broke that game open. I don't know. I've had this sort of concern about their defense. I think the only thing is you look at the other teams in the West or even around the entire conference, sans Marshall this past year, they all just sort of have these glaring flaws. And Louisiana was kind of like, our defense isn't the greatest. And that was like their biggest knock. So,
Mm-hmm.
when it's like you got Texas State, GJ Kinney does this disappearing act in the second half seasons that needs to be studied. You got Arkansas State. We just talked about Butch Jones can't field a defense. South Alabama has been all over the map the last couple of years. UL Monroe took a steep nosedive once teams kind of figured out, oh, this quarterback can't throw the football. Troy didn't figure out the quarterback situation until like the last 4 games of the season, and Southern Miss was a joke. So that was their competition in the West. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not discounting like what they accomplished by making the title game. I'm just saying like it wasn't the strongest field of competitors for them.
Right. I think that's what makes this year in the Sun Belt feel so weak is that like this is our 7-1 team. This is our one loss conference team. And uh even when they were at their peak and Woldridge was healthy, it was uneasy and it was uncertain. Again, this is not to say that Louisiana, save for Marshall, wasn't the best team in the conference this year, but it's to say that it was not like the dominance that even in bad conferences like the MAC, like Coosa, like Mountain West, you get a team that is head and shoulders above the rest because like
Mhm.
these teams are roughly balanced within the conference, and so someone is going to come out on top. Um, and yet this is our team, and we're just like sitting here like I don't know if I love this team. They were very good offensively. They run the ball as good as anyone else in the conference, as good as anyone else in G5 does. And they had some of the better offensive line play this season. And of course, again, the best quarterback this year and the best backup quarterback this year, who probably could have started at half the conference's teams. But it still doesn't feel right because this team just can't plays unsatisfactory defense. Like
Yeah,
remember like when Coastal and App, like those teams when they were at top of the conference several years ago, did you feel this uneasy about them?
no.
No.
Like App's defenses were all when they were like in the conference championship game every year, their defenses were like smothering.
Mhm.
And Coastal in 2020, I mean, it sucks that we never got to see that rematch between them and Louisiana because that year they had played earlier and it was like a 3-point game that came down to like a last second field goal. I think the way that momentum was heading, that Louisiana would have won that game. Um, but defensively, they were always good. Even Louisiana from a couple of years ago with Napier and Levi Lewis and that crew, even that defense, I felt like, yeah, this is like a championship caliber defense. I mean, frankly, the only defense I really felt great about this year was Marshall's.
Mhm.
Everybody else was kind of like, meh, you know, you were either middling or terrible. And like, those were the kind of defenses that we got out of, I mean, frankly, like, if Old Dominion had an even competent defense with the quarterback play they got out of Colton Joseph, they should have been a 7-8 win team. Like he was carrying that offense on his back and like was getting zero help. So
Mhm.
like James Madison, James Madison might be the exception to this. Their issue was offensive consistency every week. Like you
Right.
never knew what you were getting out of Barnett. But yeah, Louisiana was tough because it was just defensively, it was all over the place. Like one week, you know, I kept picking against them because I was like, they can't cover this. They can't cover a spread. And then of course they beat the tar out of Arkansas State 55-19. And I came back and I was like, Matt, what happened? And he was like, revenge or whatever. And I was like, well, can you invoke revenge every week? Because like this is ridiculous that you guys can play like this one week against a pretty good 8-win Arkansas State team. And then the next week it's like, oh, sorry, we lost to South Alabama at home.
Mhm.
And you're just like, okay, I guess like whatever you want to say. Um, Yeah, so we don't have a lot to add about this game. I mean, it was a domination. Hoover for TCU threw for 252 yards and 4 touchdowns. Again, the game was over. You could say it was over at the end of the first quarter. It was definitely over by halftime. It was 27-0. Uh, they kicked the world's saddest field goal in the fourth quarter to keep from getting shut out. I always appreciate that. Like, bro, does anybody care? Like that you kicked the field goal? Like, hey, we didn't get shut out. Sweet. You should have went for it on fourth. Who cares? Like at that point, you're down
Mhm.
34 points. All right. Anyway, TCU improved to 9-4 with the win. Louisiana dropped to 10-4. Okay. The last game of the bowl season for the Sun Belt was Texas State defeating North Texas 30-28. Um, so Ismail Mahdi had already transferred out. Lincoln Pear, who had taken a decent bit of snaps, but had not really ever made the job his.
Mm-hmm.
Went crazy in this game. 21 carries, 143 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jordan McLeod played well. Is McLeod out of eligibility? I would assume so, right?
I believe C is.
Okay. So that's going to be tough to like have to reboot with the quarterback position. They feel good about that Brad Jackson kid that they have. Who knows? Well, he hasn't played like meaningful game reps,
Mm-hmm.
so like we'll see what that looks like over the course of a season. You know, a year ago we thought Ethan Vasco might be something, and you know that didn't happen. But yeah, great win by Texas State. It's a I don't want to say it's concerning, but it's also like this was North Texas's backup quarterback that played in this one. Their starter had transferred out, I'm pretty sure, or had entered the portal, and you let that guy throw for 393 and 2 scores. Did throw 2 picks, but then he had 55 yards rushing and a touchdown, including a 70-yard run with a minute 49 to go. When you were up 9,
Mm-hmm.
so a good win for them, but yeah, Texas State again defensively kind of similar to Arkansas State and Louisiana. You got to get it figured out. Like your only notable player was Ben Bell, and he opted out after like game 3. So you got to get more contributors on the defensive side of the ball if you want to be a serious contender.
Something I didn't know about this game was the 15.5 point spread.
I stayed clear out of that. I actually had taken when we were picking at the end of the last episode. I actually took North Texas originally,
Mm-hmm.
and then Matt told me their quarterback transferred out. And then I was like, I'll just take the under, which hit by like 2 points because I was like, North Texas, they might not be able to score points, and who knows what you're going to get out of Texas State on a weekly basis. But yeah, no, the spread was huge, and I was like, I don't know that Texas State is 14 points better than anybody in the country on any given day. Like you truly don't know what you're getting from them ever.
Not this late in the season.
No.
If it was week 3, there are a couple teams I would put them over. But shoot, like you could put this team against Kennesaw or shoot even Southern Miss at this point in the year, and you don't feel good about it. Where do we stand now that it's said and done? 2 years of Jordan McLeod in the Sun Belt. This year was fine, but disappointing considering what he had done last year at James Madison. Ended the year with 30 touchdowns and 13 picks, 3,200 yards, completed 70% of passes. So it was a very good year. He led the conference in passing touchdowns this year. But again, I just feel let down as compared to what we saw last year at James Madison, where he threw for more touchdowns, less interceptions, more yards, same efficiency. I believe he had more rushing yards as well. If you were to tier him, let's say, A to F, where does Jordan McLeod rank among Sunbelt quarterbacks now that it's over?
Oh, he's definitely still in tier A for me.
All right, let's add the S tier up on top of that. Is he
he's in
still
tier
A or
S.
okay?
He's in tier S. I mean,
Sure.
like Ben Woldridge won Sunbelt Offensive Player of the Year. Jordan McLeod blew him out of the water by like, and I understand he got hurt, but Jordan McLeod threw for 30 touchdowns to Woldridge's 17. He did throw more interceptions, but they are in a very high volume passing offense with Texas State. He threw for more yards than Woldridge did. They had roughly about the same quarterback rating ish, but I mean, you could easily make an argument. I think tier S was 3 guys this year as far as quarterbacks
Mm-hmm.
go. I think it was Jordan McLeod, I think it was Ben Woldridge, and I think it was Colton Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else just sort of slots in under that. I think if you don't have one of those 3 guys as your quarterback, you could easily say, our quarterback can get lost. I'll take one of these three over. Like, I know for a fact I would take any of those three over the situation we have at Southern. I'm sure you got to
Oh
feel the
yeah.
exact same at State. So it's like, and I guess you could make an argument for Braylon Braxton being in that tier as well. But it was tough. He didn't play the full season, so he was very good in like the last 7-ish games that he played. You know,
Mhm.
Huff was sticking to his guns on Stone Earl for some reason. But you know, it all paid off when it came time to win the conference. So yeah, I mean, it was a good year for Sunbelt quarterback performances. I feel like we had a good crop this year. It was just team wise, not every team was kind of built to compete, and Texas State was the exact same deal, which is I, I think he obviously didn't have as good of a set of weapons as he did last year at James Madison. I mean, you go look at what like Elijah Surratt did at Indiana this year. He missed that
Mhm.
guy. Tyson Lawton, another guy that left for Indiana with uh Signetti. So I think he was in a really, really great spot last year. And we saw another guy in Todd Centeio a couple of years ago do really well in that system as well. So I think it's just really quarterback friendly. But I will say, for a guy that was McLeod was hurt too and was in and out of games. Like, he left the Louisiana game like in the second quarter when they played them with like a concussion. So he had games where he was dinged up, or Kenny was like, let's get this Brad Jackson kid some action. Like, that's fine, but it wasn't like he got the full complement of snaps all year long. But I thought he was great.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I just wanted to get a temp check because I think what you said was really interesting. And I'm curious how many other conferences or how often this occurs where this was a really good quarterback year, at least at the very top.
Yeah.
Shoot, I mean, even Old Dominion turns out Quinn Heineckel can ball. You know, they're even some of those guys down the depth chart, like Jalen Rayner, disappointing, but still played very well. Um, so, but as a whole, again, conference didn't feel, as you said, ready to compete. I just don't know like what how often that occurs, and that's something I'd be curious about. Um, I think is worth looking
It
into.
it's almost like, you know how people talk about the gap between like billionaires in America and like the middle class, and like just
Mhm.
how disparate those are. That it was almost like that with quarterbacks, where it was like, listen, if you've got one of these four guys, you're money. Like, every
Mhm.
week you've got points you can bank on. And if you're in the like middle class, like me, Alonzo Barnett at James Madison, um I'm trying to think. Rayner. There was no
Mhm.
guarantees. There was no floor that you could bank on. Like, you had no idea what you were getting. So I'm just like, there was a real gap between like, these guys are the absolute best, and then everybody down here. You can win a game with them. Are they going to win you anything? Probably not. But it kind of is what it is. Like, not everybody gets, a top tier quarterback every year. So, no, but I thought it was a really good year, especially like you said, like at the top, especially.
Yeah. I don't know. Interesting stuff. This was an interesting year. Especially to again, as I'm still fairly new to this conference, um, this is as unique a year as I've seen. Because of how fairly equal the teams felt, how it felt like there were obviously clear bottom feeders, but no one, save for Marshall and Louisiana, really declared themselves as best in the conference or in their division. And as we said today, neither of those teams ever felt like they were 100% locked in. I mean, I remember coming onto this show after Southern beat JMU, and I had recency bias, and I was at that game biased, but like I came out here saying Southern might be the best team in the conference. Which in retrospect is like, you tell someone once thought that Georgia Southern was the best team in the Sun Belt in 2024. Like that's stuff that I don't want attached to my name. But
that's why
that's how
after that game I
sporadic
was
this
like,
year was.
that's why after that game I told you and your brother, I was like, don't get too far out over your skis on Southern. Like they're gonna, if you do, there's gonna be like a tree right in front of you that you ski right into. Like Clay Helton, Matt and I talked about the bowl game last episode.
Mm-hmm.
Clay Helton's always got that in him, where they just totally mail in a game for seemingly no reason. So, it kind of is what it is. But so with that, Texas State closes out their season 8-5. North Texas finishes 6-7 for the year. Zeke, I don't know if you have anything left to talk about. I think we're good on this, but do you want to tell people where they can find you on socials, and then we'll get out of here?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Zeke Palermo. You can see it below me here. You can also find all the show's socials down below. I'm on Twitter at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo. I'm really excited for draft season. I always am, because it allows people like me who, as was coined by our new friend of the pod, Bryson Broadway, bad ball, as people proliferators of that idea, it allows me to pretend like I know what I'm talking about more than I already do. So I'm really looking forward to draft season. I look forward to Shedeur Sanders getting exposed in the very near future for being as fraudulent as he is. And you can read all about it on my Twitter at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo.
I'm interested for draft season as well, just because, like you said earlier, Mike Green is obviously the 1A of this, or number one with a bullet of this conference, like what the outlook looks like. I mean, I've even heard people say he should be creeping into the late first round. So he might even
Mm-hmm.
end up being a day one selection, depending on what the need is there as far as edge rusher. But I'm interested to dig into it and see kind of where other guys are slated. Like where, do we think that NFL wise these guys can be contributors at any point? That's going to be something that remains to be seen. But we will be back. You can find me on X at Watch the Stone, warm weather fans, all of that good stuff. We will be back in, let's say, for a real episode, let's say like a couple months. Once we get full on into draft season, we'll be back. We'll talk about our kind of favorite prospects, where we expect them to go within the context of the draft, and discuss it from that end. But for now, this has been the last episode of the 2024-2025 season for us. Thanks everybody that joined us, watched our stuff, consumed our content. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to do so. Again, if you want to follow our stuff, it's all here in the description. But this has been another episode of Warm Weather Fans.